The foundation of the RSHM and the transformation of the Refuge. Some of the women who gathered together in the winter of 1849 in Béziers had been waiting for years for this moment. It was well known that Gailhac was intending to begin a new religious congregation in Béziers. He knew the parishioners well, and he knew that some of the women were eager to respond to a call to religious life, but were waiting for him to begin a congregation. He had already recognized some of these vocations and encouraged the women eventually to join the congregation, but when the right time occurred. Two of these women had worked in the Refuge for many years on all sorts of jobs. Gailhac knew Rose Chanté and Cécile Cambon. They were simple women, trustworthy, and deeply spiritual. Gailhac had great hopes for another woman who was interested in religious life. Her name was Eulalie Vidal, and her father was an educator, and Eulalie and her two sisters followed in his example. So she had begun a boarding school in Béziers where both religious and secular studies were taught. And Gailhac immediately sensed the depth of her spiritual life and her passion for the crucified Christ. Then there was Rosalie Gibal, just in her early 20s, and when she first met Gailhac. Both her parents had died when she was quite young, and she had been brought up really by her brother, Jean. She loved the sick and the poor. She treated them as though they were Jesus Christ himself. And she was very eager to join a religious congregation and continue her ministry. But when Appollonie made her decision, and with the bishop's permission and encouragement, asked to be part of the congregation, Gailhac realized that the time had come, because the person that he had been waiting for, a woman who could lead the others, had arrived. February 24th, 1849 was chosen as the foundation day. On that day, with the bishop's permission, Gailhac officially handed everything over to the three women who had agreed to take charge of the work. The possession of the building, direction and management of the work that took place there, and most important, he confided to them the foundation of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. The document was signed by Gailhac, by Appollonie Cure, Eulalie Vidal, and Rose Gibal. And during the next 7 months, 3 others came to join them. Mary Rock, 23, Mary Maymard, not yet 18, and Jeanne Froment, 25. It would be a mistake, however, to think that all the women began to live in the Refuge right away. Cécile and Rose continued their service there, but Rose Gibal had just convinced her guardian that she was not too young to enter the community, and Eulalie couldn't abandon her school until the end of the academic year. And then her mother became very ill, and so she had to take care of her, and only after her death was Eulalie free to join the others. Gailhac, too, was needed in the hospital and could not be replaced until June of 1849. Only Appollonie had left her home behind almost immediately, and she moved into the Refuge. Now, the adjustment must have been extremely difficult for her. She missed her beloved husband of 17 years and was still mourning for him. As a couple, they had been used to a certain social status and an affluent lifestyle. And Appollonie had loved managing her household, and now everything was different. Many of the women in the refuge were demanding, and they were rude, even when she tried to bring them warm blankets for their comfort. She knew little about how to cope with children, particularly the young orphans, but she tried to take their mischief in stride. She would pray with Cécile and Rose, and if they wished, read to them after dinner, and at times she did what she most enjoyed, managing the improvements she arranged in the house, supervising the workmen, and looking for proximate properties that were for sale. She remembered the discussions that she and Eugène had had with Gailhac about his dreams for the poor in Béziers, and she was determined to continue the plans that she and Eugène had made to turn those dreams into reality. Just a year before Eugène's death, they had arranged for the construction of a large chapel in the refuge, large enough for all the women. Before she had entered the congregation, she had already bought the Jambon property that was adjacent to the refuge. And now she was searching for property in Besson for the orphanage for boys, and it would be called the agricultural colony. By October of 1849, the 8 women had all arrived at the refuge, ready to begin the first stage in their life as nuns, under Gaillac's careful direction. But before the group's training began, Gailhac had spent the month of September preparing Appollonie for her role as foundress and general superior of the new congregation. Their conversations were usually in writing and sometimes exchanged several times a day. When Mère Saint-Jean, as she was then called, told Gailhac how difficult it was for her to be patient with the rude women and the demanding orphans, he advised her emphatically. Work, first of all, to conserve great evenness of temper in all circumstances with all sorts of people, remembering this word of the Savior, learn of me to be gentle and humble of heart. Receive all with equal goodness. See God in all creatures. Endure their insistence and sometimes even their vulgarity, and be happy for the opportunity to renounce yourself and to offer God a small sacrifice. She wrote back to Gailhac 2 days later, promising, I am firmly resolved to correspond with grace. I will work with all my strength to become like Jesus Christ. Remembering the words of the Savior, learn of me to be gentle and humble of heart. And transformed by that gentle heart of Christ, she remained faithful to that promise for the rest of her life. There is in Béziers a room identified as the first community room, and there is a large table with 8 chairs around it, one for each member of the first community. And at that table, those very diverse women, ranging in age from 18 to 40, very different in their backgrounds and their education, in every way. Those women had to decide together as a community what groups in the refuge could be managed and what groups could not be effectively managed. During their first year as a community, they agreed that the women now in the Refuge were very different from the women that Gailhac had earlier supported. Many of them did not want to change their lives. Some of the younger women, considered delinquents, might have been brought to the Refuge by the authorities. They were not willing to come, and they did not want to stay. They resented staying there. So all efforts to help them were resisted. So as early as 1850, after serious prayer and honest sharing, the members of the community agreed that they did not have the gifts needed to manage the women in the Refuge, and that most of the women should be let go. But how could they tell Gailhac, who had initially formed the congregation to care for those in the Refuge, that he had begun 15 years earlier? Gailhac accepted the sisters' decision as God's will, and with faith and humility supported their plan to transform the Refuge. It's a big decision, and Gailhac moved into it with grace. The large sign, Bon Pasteur, that had been hung above the entrance door in 1834 was replaced by a new sign, Convent of the Sacred Heart of Mary. Some of the women who had sincerely asked for assistance in changing their lives were sent to the Montpellier Refuge. About 12 women who had been in the Refuge for many years wanted to stay on as a third-order religious group, and the RSHM agreed to help them and to house them. They were called the Sisters of the Virgin, and eventually their name was changed to the Oblates of Mary, and then by 1909, most of the remaining 19 Oblates were professed as religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. In place of the women who were sent away, it was decided to assist a younger group of teenage girls between the ages of 8 and 20 who were from bad homes, in danger of falling into prostitution, and needed guidance and protection. And they were welcomed and grouped in what was called the Preservation. Mary Maymard, now 18 and known as Mère Saint Félix, was given responsibility for the orphanage, mainly because she was the second oldest in a family of 8 children, and she knew how to handle their mischief. She soon won their love and their loyalty. By 1850, the French government began to encourage religious orders to provide education for middle-class girls. The government's announcement came as a surprise to everyone, but the RSHM were prepared with new property purchased with foresight by Appollonie in 1848, an excellent headmistress, Mère Saint Croix, formerly Eulalie Vidal, to assume responsibility for the school, and French and Spanish boarders eager to learn. The Pensionnat de Sacré de Marie, the boarding school for the Sacred Heart of Mary, was opened in 1851, and the students' tuition helped to support all the other charitable works occupying the other parts of the property. A dispensary run by Sister Agnes, primarily for the students of the boarding school, was always accessible, free of charge, to the suffering and the outcasts of Béziers. And so from 1850 to 1853, the Refuge had been completely transformed. The orphanage, the preservation, the boarding school, the dispensary, the Sisters of the Virgin, and the growing community of the Sacred Heart of Mary, all opportunities for making God known and loved. From the 1840s, Gailhac had planned to begin 2 congregations, one for women and one for men. In 1850, the congregation for men was authorized by the church, and it was called Priests of the Good Shepherd. Its purpose was to give religious assistance to the RSHM and to all the works which depend on it. 3 years later, Jean Gibal, first a lawyer and then an ordained priest, became the first member of the congregation, and more priests and brothers of the Good Shepherd soon followed. The brothers were in charge of the new orphanage for boys, for orphaned boys. Another dream of Gailhac's was fulfilled.